Hi there, I'm John Lebensold, and today I'm going to be talking a bit about using PHP and PayPal to write a simple shopping cart for a small website. And the tools we're going to be using are all free, they're all open source, and they are on the Mac. However, you can find Windows equivalents for all of them. So to start with, I'm just going to review some of the tools we're going to be using. We're going to be using Safari just to check what we're actually doing and if it's rendering properly. We're also going to be using MAMP, which is like WAMP, which is Windows, Apache, MySQL, and PHP. MAMP is Mac, Apache, MySQL, and PHP, and it's essentially a stack of technologies that lets you develop on your local computer. So the link I clicked is MAMP and MAMP Pro 1.7.1. This is on mamp.info en download.html, or you can just Google search download MAMP and you'll get here. Once you download it, you'll notice that this pops up, and you just have to take the MAMP folder and drag it into the applications folder. Once we're in the applications folder, you'll see MAMP, and just double click on MAMP here. And the start page will open up, and you'll see this little window here, and you can see the Apache server and the MySQL server are both running. If we go to Preferences, under PHP, or under Apache rather, you'll see that the document root that is currently set up is users/videos/sites. And this is actually the user account that I'm under is videos, so it's the sites folder for my home directory, which in this case is videos. So I just hit OK, and it'll set that up. So now that everything is set up, if I go to my videos folder, you'll see that I've already got an index.php file. Now, before I set up Eclipse, which is going to be my development environment, I'm just going to right-click on it and hit Open with Text Edit. And you'll see that I've got an opening PHP tag and then PHP info, and that's all. If I go to localhost on port 8080, I should be taken to a PHP info page, like this one. So we know that PHP is properly set up. The next step is to get Eclipse and to have Eclipse running. So I'm going to go back to good old Google, and I'm going to search for download Eclipse PDT. And click on the first link, click on the release build, scroll down to Mac OS X PDT all-in-one, and just download it from the closest mirror available. And what you're going to end up with, I can actually close this right here, and we can close this, and I can close this, is a PDT all-in-one tar.gz file, which when you extract it will give you an Eclipse folder. Now this you probably want to put in your applications folder since it's the container for the Eclipse program. Now we're using Eclipse because it's a integrated development environment, which means that it has tools like code completion, and it'll also help us manage our project as we're developing it and as we're building out classes, as opposed to a text editor, which is also really handy, but won't provide the tools that a full IDE will provide us. So I'm going to double click on Eclipse, and I'm going to open it. We can also eject MAMP and MAMP Pro. And I'm going to set this as my default workspace. We can just close the welcome screen. And what you're seeing here is essentially the base page for, or the base UI for Eclipse. Now the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new project. Under projects, I'm going to go to PHP, create a new PHP project. So now I'm just going to call this PayPal shopping cart. I'm going to uncheck use default, hit browse, and I'm going to go to the sites folder in videos, which is the same thing as my document root. And I'm going to hit finish, and I'm going to say create project in users, videos, sites. I'm going to hit OK. And this project is associated with the PHP perspective, so we're going to hit yes. You'll notice that our UI changes slightly, and there's a little PHP button that appears at the top right. And if I double click on index.php and I start typing PHP code, and I hit save, you'll see that it's starting to do the whole code highlighting that we would expect. Instead of doing PHP info, let's see if we can get some XML data put together for our shopping cart. So I'm going to start by creating some folders here. And to do that, I'm going to right click and hit new folder. This folder is going to be called HTML. And then I'm going to create another folder. I'm going to call it classes. And inside the HTML folder, I'm going to create a CSS folder. And I don't think we're going to have any images in this project, so we can just leave it at that. And I'm going to move the index.php file into the HTML folder. And the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a folder called functions. Now, classes is where we're going to store actual objects that we write. Functions is where we're going to store procedural, essentially a couple of procedural libraries that we're going to be calling on to do things like picking up XML data or rendering certain templates that we'll start to write. And in the HTML folder, we're going to have our front-facing web page with any kind of publicly available resources like CSS, or we could also have images or JavaScript. Now I'm going to create our shopping cart. So I'm going to create a new XML file, and I'm going to call this catalog.xml. And I'm going to hit source. And here what we're going to do is we're going to create a new node, a root node, calling it catalog, or actually, let's call this items. So now that we have an items root node, I'm going to create a product. And I'm going to close that tag. And the product has to have an ID. So in this case, let's say we're making a website for certain kinds of foods. So the first thing we're going to have is we're going to have tomato soup. So I'm going to make the title of this product tomato soup. And the description will be freshly made tomato soup in a can. And I'm going to have an image, which we'll get to in a bit, and I'm also going to have a price. And let's say our can of tomato soup costs $1.33 online. And our ID, which is the ID that's going to appear on the bill, will be tomato soup, one word. Now for an image, I'm just going to go to Google and I'm just going to find a tomato soup image. And we're going to use that since I don't really have a tomato soup image. Doesn't really matter which one we use. Let's take the first one. And I'm going to take this URL and just drop it in here. And obviously, if this was a real store, we would have our own images and we would be referencing them in the HTML folder. But we could also be referencing them off of Flickr or any other kind of image hosting solution as well. So let's create another record. This time we're going to create one for pasta. And it's going to be linguine. And And I'm going to give it a description again. Real, authentic linguine. And again, we're going to need an image and a price. Now, what's nice about XML is that we're actually using a markup that describes our data. And so if we want to add tags or remove tags, we just have to explicitly ask for them in our PHP code. And this is a lot more flexible, at least initially, than working with a database, because we can sort of change our schema before having to finalize our design. So I'm just going to quickly go back here and find myself some linguine. That looks great. And I'm going to put that in there, and the price for our linguine will be $3.99. And I'm going to save that. So now we have a catalog. Obviously this is not HTML, but we need to parse it and then render it. So in PHP, there's this excellent function for doing just that. And in order to get the actual file contents, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do file underscore get contents, and then I'm going to do file name. And this is going to be contents. And file name, in this case, is going to be catalog.xml. And then I'm just going to echo those contents. Now, if we go back to our web server under HTML, and if I view the source, you'll see that we've got items, product, basically everything that was in our file has just been blurted out onto the screen, which isn't too handy so far. So now we're going to take the contents of this file, and we're going to use an object that comes with PHP 5.2 called the simple XML element object. So I'm going to say XML equals new simple XML element, and I'm going to put in contents. And now we're dealing with an actual object. And what I can do is I can actually iterate through this object by saying for each XML as product. And then I can echo something like a list item. And then I can do product title. Let's see what that does. So now what we're just doing is we're actually echoing the tomato soup and the linguine without any of the other data. Now let's see if we can sort of refactor this a bit. So I'm going to cut that out and I'm going to put it inside there for starters. So now XML, we've just sort of flattened this out a bit. Now the other thing that I'm noticing here is that file name, this is a configuration item. So it doesn't really belong in our index.php file. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a new file in my functions folder, and I'm just going to call this functions. And what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to have a section where I define certain globals. Now, a global is just a fancy way of saying that this variable should be accessible to everybody. And PHP has a construct for this, which you basically make something a capitalized word, and then you define it. So in this case, it's going to be define, and the name for this is going to be store underscore XML underscore file, and the value for that is going to be /catalog.xml. Now, if this for any reason changes down the line, I can, of course, just change it one place, which is going to be in my functions file. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my index.php file, and I'm going to get rid of file name, and I'm actually going to reference using require once my functions.php file. And then here, instead of using file name, I'm going to use store underscore XML file. Now, if we refresh this, you'll see that nothing has changed, which is a good thing. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap up the simple XML element into a function, since this code here isn't very well described. And I'm going to call this function get XML catalog. And instead of doing it that way, I'm just going to say return new simple XML element. And then I'm going to say get XML catalog. And I'm going to cut this out. I'm going to go back to my functions file, and I'm going to say functions, and I'm just going to put it here. Later on, we can actually provide some code hints, essentially describing what this does, or we can even wrap up this function in another object if we find that there's commonality with other functions. And this way, our code here stays relatively clean. Now, if I wanted to access other properties of this XML file, it would be as simple as using product title, maybe, and then product description. And then if I save that and I refresh it, then I get the description as well. In the next video, we're going to finish essentially the catalog for our online store, and then we're going to start looking at the PayPal sandbox, and then after that, we're going to look at essentially generating the final shopping cart page. I'm John Lebensold, and thanks for listening.